Welcome to the Sleep Channel. This is a place built for minds that will not quiet, for the thoughts that return the moment your head meets the pillow, for the stillness that never quite arrives, for the version of you that is tired, genuinely tired, and yet somehow cannot rest. You are not alone in that. Many minds carry more than they should at the end of a day, replaying conversations, rehearsing tomorrow, holding on to things that the night was supposed to wash away. If that is you, you are exactly where you need to be. Here, every night, we tell a story. Not just any story, an ancient one, drawn from the mythologies of civilizations that lived and breathed and wondered long before us. People who looked at the same stars you look at tonight and built entire worlds of meaning around them. Stories that have survived centuries, not because they are exciting, but because they carry something that the modern world has almost forgotten. Something unhurried, something vast, something that gently reminds the restless mind that the world was turning quietly, long before your worries existed, and will continue turning long after they are gone. You do not need to do anything here. You do not need to follow closely. You do not need to remember. You only need to close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the words carry you somewhere gentle, until sleep finds you, in its own time, in its own way. This is the Sleep Channel, and tonight we have a story for you. Tonight, we go somewhere no living person was ever meant to go, beneath the earth, beyond the light, into a place that exists in the stories of almost every civilization that has ever lived on this earth, under different names, in different languages, but always described the same way: cold, dark, silent, the place where the dead go when they are finished with the world above. Most people who have ever drawn breath on this earth have wondered about it. What lies beyond? What the darkness holds? Whether the people we lose are truly gone, or simply somewhere we cannot follow. Tonight, you will see it. Through the eyes of a man who refused, completely and absolutely refused, to accept that death was permanent, that loss was final, that the person he loved most in the world was simply gone. He was not remarkable in the way that heroes usually are. He was not a warrior trained for battle, not a king hardened by power, not a god immune to pain. He was a musician, a young man whose entire life existed in sound, in melody, in the particular kind of beauty that moves through the air and enters the chest, and does something there that words have never quite been able to describe. But his music was not ordinary music. His music was the kind that made the natural world stop what it was doing and listen. Rivers that had been flowing for centuries slowed at the sound of it. Ancient trees that had never moved in their lives leaned toward it. And people, ordinary people who had never wept at anything in their lives, felt something open quietly inside them when he played. And yet, even that was almost not enough for where he was going, because the place he descended into on this particular night had never once been moved by anything. Not by power, not by prayer, not by the tears of the living, or the pleas of the dying. It was a place of absolute finality, a place that had one rule and had never broken it. Not once, not for anyone, until him. Tonight, we follow Orpheus into the dark, into the kingdom of the dead, and we will discover together what a man is capable of when love becomes the only thing he has left. Find a comfortable position now and close your eyes. Let your breath slow and your body grow heavy. The world above is already fading, and the darkness below is waiting. There are places in the ancient world where music was not merely entertainment, where it was not something you listened to at a distance with polite appreciation, and then forgot when the sound faded. In the ancient world, music was understood to be something alive, something with weight and intention, something that moved through the air the way weather moves, not asking permission, not announcing itself, simply arriving and changing everything it touched. Orpheus was born into that world. He came from Thrace, a land of mountains and rivers in the northern reaches of ancient Greece, where the winters were long and the sky was wide, and the people who lived there understood hardship the way you understand something you have never been without. His father was said to be Apollo himself, the god of light and music and poetry, though Orpheus never spoke of this with any particular pride. He simply played, and when he played, the world listened, not as a manner of speaking, not as poetry. Literally, the rivers of Thrace were known to slow their current when he sat at their banks and drew sound from his lyre. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, the way a person slows their pace when they hear something that makes them want to stay where they are a little longer. The water would lose its urgency, the rushing would soften, and for a time, the river would simply move, without hurry, without destination, content to exist in the presence of the sound. The trees were the same, ancient oaks that had stood in the same place for centuries, that had never once shifted the direction of their branches for anything the world had offered them, would lean, imperceptibly, the way attention leans, as though something in the wood itself recognized the music and turned toward it, the way all living things turn toward what they need. And the animals would gather, not the small cautious creatures only, but the large ones too, the ones that did not gather for anything. Wolves that had never in their lives sat still in the open would settle at a distance and remain there, ears forward, heads slightly tilted, for as long as the music lasted. And when it stopped, they would remain for a moment longer, as though waiting to be sure it was truly finished, before returning quietly to whatever they had been doing before the sound found them. This was Orpheus, not a warrior, not a king. A young man with a lyre, and a gift so complete it did not feel like a gift so much as a condition of his existence. The way some people are simply tall, or simply left-handed, Orpheus was simply music. It was not what he did, it was what he was. He lived simply, he asked for little. He moved through the world of ancient Thrace with the particular unhurried quality of someone who has never needed to compete for anything, because what he carried could not be competed with. People made way for him, not out of fear or obligation, but out of something closer to reverence, the instinctive deference that arises when you are in the presence of something you cannot fully explain. And then he met Eurydice. She was not a goddess, not a figure of myth or legend in her own right. She was a young woman, a nymph of the forests and meadows, connected to the living world in the way that certain people are connected to it, not just living in it, but belonging to it, the way a tree belongs to the ground it grows in. She moved through the natural world with an ease and a quietness that suggested she had never once felt out of place in it. When Orpheus first saw her, he did not play. This surprised people who knew him. Music was his instinct, his first response to everything the world offered him. Joy produced music, grief produced music, confusion and wonder and gratitude all found their way eventually into sound. But when he first saw Eurydice, he was simply quiet, as though for the first time in his life, the music had found somewhere better to be. They were married in the way of the ancient world, with flowers and fire and the blessing of the gods, and for a time that felt both very long and not nearly long enough. They were simply happy. The particular happiness that does not announce itself, that does not require anything outside itself to sustain it, the kind that exists quietly in ordinary moments, a morning, a meal, a walk along a familiar path, and asks for nothing more than to continue. It did not continue. One afternoon, not long after their marriage, Eurydice was walking alone through the meadows near their home. The grass was long. The light was warm. It was the kind of afternoon that feels safe, that feels like nothing could possibly interrupt it. She did not see the snake until it was too late. The bite was sudden. The pain was brief. And then, with a quietness that matched everything about her, Eurydice was gone, carried down into the darkness beneath the earth, into the place the ancient Greeks called the Underworld. And Orpheus, for the first time in his life, could not play. Grief is a strange thing. It does not arrive the way people expect it to. Not always loud, not always immediate. Sometimes it comes quietly, the way cold comes into a room when a window is left open somewhere distant. You do not notice it at first. You simply find yourself colder than you were before. And by the time you understand what has happened, it has already settled into everything. For Orpheus, grief arrived as silence, not the comfortable silence he had always known, not the silence of a riverbank at dawn or a hillside at dusk where the absence of sound feels full and restful. This was a different kind of silence entirely. The silence of a world that had lost something it did not know how to replace. The silence of a lyre that had not been touched in days, of hands that had forgotten what they were for. He did not play. The people of Thrace noticed. They noticed the way you notice when a river that has always been there suddenly runs dry. Not with alarm exactly, but with a particular unease, a sense that something fundamental had shifted in the world, and that things would not simply return to the way they were on their own. The animals that had gathered at the sound of his music did not come anymore. The wolves stayed in the forests. The birds kept their distance. Even the rivers moved with their usual indifferent urgency, as though the music had never slowed them, as though they had simply imagined it. Orpheus sat with his grief, the way you sit with something too large to move. He thought about Eurydice constantly, not in the sharp, dramatic way of someone performing their sorrow for an audience, quietly. The way you think about something that has become so much a part of your daily existence that its absence is present in everything. In the morning when the light came through in a particular way she had always loved. In the evening when the air cooled and they used to sit together without needing to speak. In the small ordinary moments that had never seemed significant until they were gone. He thought about where she was. The ancient Greeks understood death differently from the way it is understood now. They did not speak of it as an ending exactly, but as a transition, a journey downward. Beneath the earth, beneath the rivers and the roots of the oldest trees, there existed another world entirely, the Underworld, ruled by Hades, the oldest and most solemn of the gods, and his queen Persephone, a vast and shadowed kingdom where the souls of the dead lived out their eternity in a pale reflection of the world above. Eurydice was there, not gone, not dissolved into nothing. There, somewhere beneath his feet, as he sat on the hillside where they used to walk together, somewhere beneath the grass and the stone and the dark earth, present, in the way that something is present when it is very close but completely unreachable. This was the thought that would not leave him. She was not nowhere. She was somewhere. And somewhere, however dark and however far, was a place a man could theoretically walk to, if he was willing, if he was brave enough or desperate enough, or simply unwilling enough to accept that the distance between them was permanent. Orpheus picked up his lyre, not to play, just to hold, to feel the familiar weight of it in his hands, the smooth, worn wood, the tension of the strings beneath his fingers. He sat with it for a long time in the gathering dark. The stars appeared one by one above him. The moon rose slowly over the mountains of Thrace and cast its pale light across the hillside. And somewhere in the long, quiet hours of that night, a decision formed, not dramatically, not with a sudden resolution or a moment of blazing courage, more quietly than that. The way water finds its way through stone, not by force, but by persistence, by the simple refusal to accept that there is no way through.
You was going to go and get her.
He was going to descend into the underworld, into the kingdom of the dead, into the place no living soul had ever entered and returned from, and he was going to bring Eurydice back. He did not know if it was possible. He suspected it was not. But impossibility had never been a conversation he had needed to have with the world before. The world had always made exceptions for his music. He could only hope, with everything he had, that the world below would be no different from the world above in that one particular regard. He stood. He lifted his lyre onto his shoulder, and he began to walk toward the entrance to the underworld, a cave at the edge of the world, where the earth opened downward into permanent darkness, where the air smelled of deep stone and ancient water, and where no living man had any business going. He walked without hesitation, because hesitation was a luxury that belonged to people who still had something left to lose. The entrance to the underworld was not dramatic. This surprised him somehow. He had expected something that announced itself, something that made the air change and the ground tremble and every instinct in a living body scream to turn back. But it was simply a cave, dark stone, a downward passage, the smell of deep earth and water that had never seen sunlight, the sound of a river somewhere below, moving slowly, with a heaviness that was different from any river he had ever heard above ground. He descended. The light from the world above faded quickly, not gradually the way light fades at dusk, bleeding slowly out of the sky over the course of an hour, leaving you time to adjust. It simply stopped. One moment there was a pale gray glow from the entrance behind him, and then there was not. The darkness was complete and absolute and entirely without apology. He kept walking. His lyre was in his hands, not playing yet, just held. The way you hold something familiar when everything around you is unfamiliar, a comfort that asked nothing of him except to be carried. The passage descended for a long time. The stone walls were cold and damp beneath his fingers when he steadied himself against them. The air grew heavier with every step. Not difficult to breathe, but different, thicker somehow, older, as though the air down here had been the same air for centuries, recycled slowly through a world that had no wind to freshen it, and no sun to warm it, and no seasons to remind it that time was passing. He heard the river before he saw it, the Styx, the river that separated the world of the living from the world of the dead. In the darkness he could see it only as a faint movement, a suggestion of water, dark and slow and wide. And at its edge, a boat, and in the boat, a figure, Charon, the ferryman of the dead. He was ancient in the way that certain things are ancient, not merely old, but worn into a kind of permanence by the sheer accumulated weight of time. He had been ferrying the dead across this river since before memory. He did not look up when Orpheus approached. He did not need to. He knew already that what stood at the edge of his river was alive. The living had a quality the dead did not, a warmth, a particular weight to their breathing, an aliveness that was as obvious down here as darkness was obvious above. He told Orpheus to go back, not unkindly, simply, the way you tell someone something that is simply true and requires no elaboration. The living did not cross. That was not a rule that had ever needed to be enforced, because no living soul had ever been foolish enough or desperate enough to attempt it. Until now, Orpheus did not argue. He did not plead. He did not try to explain himself in words. because he had never trusted words the way he trusted music. He simply began to play. The sound entered the darkness the way light enters a room when a door is opened. Not asking permission, not announcing itself, simply arriving, filling the space it found itself in completely and immediately. The notes rose and fell in the cold air of the underworld, with the same unhurried certainty they had always carried in the world above. But down here, in the silence that had never been broken by anything resembling beauty, the effect was different. Charon was still. The oar that had been moving with the slow automatic rhythm of something done 10,000 times stopped moving. The boat drifted slightly on the dark current, and the ferryman, who had never in all his ancient existence felt anything resembling what the living called emotion, felt something. He could not have named it. He had no language for it. But it moved through him the way the music moved through the air, without asking permission, and left something changed in its wake. He gestured toward the boat. Orpheus stepped in. The river was crossed in silence. The music had stopped, but its presence remained in the air the way the presence of something significant remains after it has passed. Charon did not speak. Orpheus did not speak. The dark water moved slowly beneath them, and on the other side, the underworld opened up. It was vast. He had not expected vastness. He had imagined something oppressive and close. A cave extended, a darkness with walls, but it was enormous. A world entire, with plains that stretched to horizons he could not see, and rivers that moved through the dark landscape with slow indifference, and shadows that were not merely the absence of light, but something with their own particular quality, their own particular weight. The souls of the dead moved through it like smoke, present but not quite solid, there but not entirely. They did not speak to him. They did not look at him with any particular curiosity. They simply moved slowly through their eternal landscape, with the particular unhurried quality of beings who have nowhere specific to be and all of eternity in which to not be there. He walked among them, toward the center of it all, toward the place where Hades sat on his throne of dark stone with Persephone beside him, the rulers of everything down here, the final authority on every soul that had ever descended. He walked without stopping, because stopping was not something he had come all this way to do. Hades did not grant audiences. This was not a rule that had ever needed to be stated, because it had never needed to be enforced. No living soul had ever reached his throne room. No living soul had ever navigated the river, crossed the plains of the dead, passed through the vast shadowed landscape of the underworld, and arrived breathing, warm heart still beating at the foot of his throne. Until now. The throne room of Hades was everything the world above was not. Where the world above had warmth and color, and the particular restless energy of living things, this place had stillness, complete and ancient stillness, the kind that does not feel empty but full of accumulated time, full of every soul that had ever passed through this place since the beginning of the world. The walls were dark stone, worn smooth by centuries. The air was cold and perfectly still, and at the center of it all, two thrones. Hades sat on the left. He was not what Orpheus had expected. He had expected something monstrous, something that announced its power through size or fury, or the particular overwhelming presence of a thing designed to inspire terror. But Hades was simply solemn. Ancient and solemn in the way that deep water is solemn. Not threatening exactly, just absolute. The kind of presence that does not need to raise its voice because it has never once needed to. Persephone sat on his right. She was different from her husband in the way that spring is different from winter. Not opposing exactly, but distinct. There was something in her that still carried the world above, something that had not entirely forgotten sunlight and growing things, and the particular quality of air that moves through an open field in the early morning. She had been taken from that world, and she had made her peace with where she was, but she had not entirely forgotten where she came from. She looked at Orpheus with something close to recognition, not of him specifically, but of what he carried, of the particular quality of someone who has lost something they cannot accept losing. She knew that quality. She had worn it herself once. Hades spoke first. He asked with the calm of something that has never needed to hurry, what a living man was doing in his kingdom. Orpheus did not answer in words. He played. What came from his lyre in that throne room was different from anything he had ever played before. Not technically, not in the arrangement of notes or the movement of his fingers across the strings, but in what it carried. Every piece of music he had ever played before had been beautiful. This was something beyond beautiful. This carried everything. Every morning he had watched Eurydice move through their home in the early light. Every evening they had sat together in comfortable silence. Every small, ordinary moment that had seemed insignificant until it was gone and revealed itself in its absence to have been everything. It carried grief, not the performed grief of someone making a case, the real thing. The grief of a man who has had something removed from the center of his existence and has been walking around the absence of it ever since, trying to remember how to be a person in a world that no longer contains the thing that made him one. The throne room was completely silent except for the music, and then something happened that had never happened before in the entire history of the underworld. The souls of the dead, who had been drifting through their eternal landscape, with the slow indifference of beings beyond feeling, stopped. They gathered at the edges of the throne room, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, drawn by something they had not felt since they were alive. Something that reminded them of the world above, of warmth, of the particular ache of being human in a world that is beautiful and brief and impossible to hold on to. Some of them wept, and Persephone, queen of the underworld, daughter of the earth, wept quietly on her throne of dark stone. And Hades, the god who had never granted anything to anyone who had not already died, was still. For a long time after the music stopped, nobody spoke. The silence that followed was different from the silence that had preceded it. It had been changed by what had passed through it, the way a room is changed by a conversation that has taken place inside it, even after the words have faded. Then Hades spoke. His voice was the same as it had always been, calm, absolute. The voice of something that does not change because it has never needed to. But what he said was different. He said that Eurydice could go, that she could return with Orpheus to the world above, that the music had moved him in a way he had no framework for and no precedent to follow, and no choice but to honor. He said it simply and without elaboration, the way he said everything, as a fact, as a decision that had been made and would not be revisited. But there was one condition. Orpheus would lead Eurydice back through the underworld and up through the passage to the world above. She would follow directly behind him, and he must not look back. Not once, not for any reason, not until both of them stood in the light of the living world. If he looked back, she would return to the underworld forever. Orpheus agreed without hesitation. The condition seemed simple. He had descended into the kingdom of the dead. He had crossed the river Styx. He had stood before Hades himself and moved him to grant the impossible. Looking forward for the length of a walk seemed like the smallest possible price for everything he was being given back. He did not yet understand that it would be the hardest thing he had ever done. She was behind him. He could not see her. He could not hear her. The dead do not move the way the living move, do not breathe the way the living breathe, do not leave the same evidence of their presence in the air around them. There was no sound of footsteps behind him, no warmth at his back, no small familiar sounds that would have told him in the world above that she was there. There was only darkness and faith. He walked. The throne room of Hades fell away behind him as he moved back through the vast plains of the underworld. The souls of the dead parted silently as he passed. The rivers moved in the darkness on either side. The cold air pressed against him from every direction with its particular ancient weight, and somewhere behind him, Eurydice followed. He told himself this with every step. She is there. She is following. She is behind you, and she is real, and she is coming back with you, and all you have to do is keep walking forward and not look back. Just walk. Just keep your eyes forward and your feet moving, and trust what you cannot see, and she will be there when you reach the light. She will be there. He kept walking. The passage upward was longer than he remembered the descent being, or perhaps it only felt that way. Time moves differently when you are carrying something precious and fragile, and entirely dependent on a single condition being met. Every step felt considered. Every moment of darkness felt extended. The stone walls were damp and cold when he steadied himself against them, and the air grew gradually lighter as he climbed, and somewhere far above him, impossibly far, there was the faint suggestion of something that might eventually become light. He focused on that. He did not think about Eurydice directly. He could not afford to. Thinking about her meant wondering about her, and wondering about her meant the questions that he could not answer and could not stop himself from wanting to answer. Was she truly there? Was she following? Was she close behind him, or drifting further back with every step? Was the condition being honored, or had Hades given him something and then quietly taken it back in the darkness where he could not see? He did not know. He could not know. That was the condition. Not merely that he should not look back, but that he should walk forward without knowing, without certainty, without the evidence his eyes would have given him if he had been permitted to use them. He had to choose with every single step to believe that she was there without being able to prove it. This was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than the descent, harder than crossing the Styx, harder than standing before Hades and finding music in a grief so complete it had nearly silenced him entirely. All of those things had required courage and desperation and love, but this required something different, something quieter, and in some ways more demanding. It required trust, pure and absolute, and entirely without evidence. He was almost there. The light was no longer a suggestion. It was real now, pale and grey and distant still, but growing with every step. He could see the outline of the passage around him, could see his own hands on the lyre, could see the stone beneath his feet. The world above was close, minutes away, perhaps less. She is there, she is behind you. Keep walking. Do not look back. You are almost there, you are almost home. Just a little further. Just keep your eyes forward and your feet moving, and in a few more minutes you will both be standing in the light, and you will turn around, and she will be there, and this will all be over, and you will have done the impossible thing, and brought her back, and everything. He looked back. It was not a decision. That was the cruelest part of it. It was not a moment of doubt, or a conscious choice to break the condition. It was simply human. The unbearable accumulated weight of not knowing finally becoming heavier than the instruction not to look, the love that had brought him all the way down here and all the way back up again, expressing itself in the only way it knew how, by wanting to see her, by needing to see her, by reaching for the proof that everything had been real and she was truly there, and he had not been walking alone through the darkness this entire time. He turned, and she was there. For one moment, she was there, close behind him, exactly where she had been the entire time. Her face in the pale grey light of the passage was exactly as he remembered it, calm, beautiful, entirely herself. And then, her eyes met his, and in them he saw it. Not anger, not accusation, not the sharp pain of betrayal. Something quieter than all of those things, something that understood, that had perhaps always known this moment would come, because she knew him. She knew the man who had walked into death itself for love, and she knew that the same love that had brought him here was the love that had just undone everything. She did not speak. She simply began to recede. Slowly, the way light recedes at the end of the day, not all at once, but in degrees. The edges of her first, then the rest, fading back into the darkness of the underworld, with the same quietness that had always been hers, her eyes on his until the very last moment, and then she was gone. The passage was empty behind him. Orpheus stood alone in the grey light between the world of the dead and the world of the living. The lyre was in his hands. The light from above fell across his face. The world he had fought so hard to return to was right there, just ahead, just a few more steps away. He stood there for a long time. Then he walked into the light, alone. The world above received him quietly. The light was warmer than he remembered. The air moved against his face with the particular gentleness of something that had been waiting. The grass was green, and the sky was wide, and the rivers of Thrace moved with their usual unhurried certainty in every direction around him. The world had not changed. It had simply continued, the way the world always continues, indifferent to what has happened inside the small private lives of the people who move through it. Orpheus sat down on the hillside where they used to walk together. He sat there for a long time. The sun moved slowly across the sky above him. The wind came and went through the grass around him, and eventually, without quite deciding to, he lifted his lyre, and he played. What came out was different from anything he had ever played before. Not sad exactly, not joyful, something that existed in the space between those two things, where most of the truest human feelings actually live. It moved through the air of Thrace the way it always had. The rivers slowed, the trees leaned, the animals gathered at a respectful distance and were still. But this music carried something new, something that had not been there before the descent, before the darkness, before the moment in the passage when everything was lost in the space of a single backwards glance. It carried the particular weight of a love that had been tested by the most impossible thing imaginable and had not survived, but had also never stopped being real. People who heard it wept without knowing why. They would describe it afterward as the most beautiful thing they had ever heard, and also the saddest, and also somehow the most peaceful, as though the music understood something about loss that they had always felt but never been able to name, as though it was telling them that the people we lose do not simply disappear, that love does not require the presence of its object to remain love, that Eurydice was gone, and Orpheus would carry that forever, and the carrying of it was not only grief, it was also a kind of keeping. Let that thought settle now, as the music fades, and the hillside grows quiet, and the stars appear one by one above Thrace in the ancient sky. You do not need to hold on to anything tonight. Whatever you are carrying, you can set it down. Let your breath slow, and your body grow heavy, and the darkness around you become something gentle rather than something restless. You are safe here, and the night is long and quiet and entirely yours. Good night.